Hello, welcome. My name is Michael Kramer. I am presenting this month's webinar on behalf of Perry Johnson Laboratory Accreditation. I want to thank everybody for logging in and listening to us this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you happen to be located. I am the Calibration Inspection Program Manager at PJLA, and this month I will be presenting on the decision rule and their applications to meeting the requirements of ISO 17025 2017. Bear with me, I'm having a little problem getting to my starting point. All right, sorry about that, folks. This webinar is being recorded. All of our webinars are recorded. You can go online at Perry Johnson's website, pjlabs.com. You go to the tab Recorded Webinars. Shortly, when we're completed here, I know it's a Friday, you may have some colleagues that may have started their weekend a little early and perhaps would appreciate the fact that they can go on our website and listen to today's presentation. Also, the individual slide will also be available on our website. Go to the webinars tab and you will see the tab for just the slide presentation. So there's no need to email me and ask me for the slides. They are available up on our website along with the recording. As always, you can ask questions during the course of this webinar. We'll entertain them at the conclusion. You should have a box there on your screen. Again, please keep your questions related to today's topic. Today's topic, the decision rule. It's going to vary on how that's looked at, particularly among you folks in testing. Just bear in mind, I am a calibration individual. If you're very program specific in regards to, say, perhaps a specific test you're doing, I may not be able to answer your question. Hopefully, we'll answer a lot of those during the course of this presentation. So, decision rule. So, what is that? It should be nothing new. There was a requirement in the 2017 that incorporates the decision rule. It was there, however, it was never defined. So the 2017 standard is one of the new definitions that the standard has encompassed. And you can see the definition of a decision rule is a rule that describes how measurement uncertainty is accounted for when making statements of conformity with a specified requirement. So when I said that was always been a requirement, we have a clause from the 2005 standard under reporting. So whenever you made that statement of compliance, the measurement, the uncertainty of measurement shall be taken into account. Hence, that's what the decision rule is. As you can see by the definition, it's how it's taken into account. So you'll see it's magnified in 2017. So the decision rule first makes its appearance in the 2017 after the definition during this, in the section for review, requests, tenders, and contracts. So under clause 713, when the customer requests a statement of conformity to a specification or a standard for a test or calibration, And what we're saying there, and you'll see this further clarified in this presentation, if your report is making a statement such as pass, fail, intolerance, out of tolerance, that's a statement of conformity. The decision rule shall be clearly defined unless inherited in the requested specification or standard. The decision rule shall be communicated to, and a key word here is and agreed with the customer. So the key is also when it's requested, which implies it is requested by the customer. This means that the contract review must take place and a clear indication agreed on before the job is started. So hence the decision rule should be discussed and agreed to up in the during the contract review process. So I propose a question: can there be a default decision rule, take it or leave it sort of approach? And I have done, and we're doing more and more assessments now, of course, to the 2017 standard. Folks, our transition period is going to expire in roughly a year. So most everyone who is having their assessments now when we're coming on site is to the new standard. So I've seen this before, a decision rule, a default decision rule presented during contract review. And of course, I would say if a customer sees that and agrees to that, then you're fulfilling the requirement during contract review that is presented and agreed to. One thing I like to specify here with the decision rule, however, I feel the laboratory, you'll see here some clauses where the laboratory needs to be flexible. And if they have the capabilities to meet the requirements of the customers. This is specified in other parts of the standard. Also, I just want to have an example here. So one size may not fit all. So you may have a varied array of clients. So just have an example here of a pipette. So under these various examples here, a pipette can be used for DNA testing in the crime lab. Pipette can be used for, can be used in a court of law, in other words, the results of any sort of testing that pipette was used for. Public health, the pipette can be used to test drinking water, for example. Or else a pipette can be used perhaps in a chemistry class or some other rough estimation of delivered volumes. So I would say, based on these circumstances, the level of list of false acceptance would not be the same. Hence, some of your customers may have very, very different criteria for defining how the decision rule is applied in reporting their statement of compliance. So again, the standard is also as far as meeting customers' requirements, being flexible. The laboratory shall have a procedure for review, request, tenders, and contracts, which is where the decision rule first appears. And under D, the procedure shall ensure that the appropriate methods and procedures are selected and are capable of meeting the customer's requirements. Also, the laboratory shall cooperate with customers in their representatives in clarifying the customer's request and in monitoring the laboratory's performance in relation to the work performed. Under structural requirements, the laboratory activities shall be carried out in such a way as to meet the requirements of this document and the laboratory's customers, regulatory authorities, and organizations providing recognition. The laboratory management shall ensure that communication take place regarding the effectiveness of the management system and the importance of meeting customers and other requirements. And also under reporting the results, it shall include all information agreed with the customer and necessary for the interpretation of the results, and all information required by the method used. Also, some flexibility may be needed in regards to risk, which is now a key factor and actually a new section within the 17025 standard. So customers which operate both under 17025, and also you may have clients that are now presented risk in ISO 9001, 2015, where they're looking at that risk perhaps more closely, the risk of false acceptance, and making a statement of compliance on their test or calibration reports. So there's 9001, 6.1 is where those requirements starts. Actions taken to address risk and opportunities shall be proportional to the potential impact on the conformity of the products and services. And of course, under 17025, Section 8.5 is a new requirements concerning risk. So if you're a calibration lab and you're doing work perhaps for a testing lab, they are now, as per Section 8.5, the laboratory shall consider the risk and opportunities associated with laboratory activities. So shortly after I began writing this presentation, a guidance document came out. So I just want to bring your attention to this. I have incorporated some of the ideas behind this guidance document into my presentation today. This is an ILAC guidance document. G documents, G stands for guidance. They're different than the P documents, which are policy documents, which PJLA, PL12, PL3, PL4 stems from ILAC policies. This is a guidance document. I was able to get a hold of this and review it. It's hot off the press. So this guidance document has been prepared to assist laboratories in the use of decision rules when declaring statement of conformity to a specification or standard as required now in 17025. The revised 17025 2017 recognized that no single decision rule can address all statements of conformity across the diverse scope of testing and calibration. And 17025 is for testing and calibration, and there's multiple types of testing and calibration, of course, that folks under our accreditation are accredited to perform. So a couple definitions, and these are brought forth from the guidance document that comes up often with decision rules. The concept of a guard banding, the interval between a tolerance limit and a corresponding acceptance limit, where that acceptance limit is the tolerance limit with an acceptance limit which is guard banded. There's something called simple acceptance. This is a decision rule in which the acceptance limit is the same as the tolerance limits. So if you look at that and you think about that, that implies no guard banding. That is called simple acceptance. Term you see often used a lot with uncertainty and tolerance is a TUR ratio, and that is a test uncertainty ratio, and that is the ratio of the tolerance of a measured quantity divided by, this is assuming your K equals 2, 95%, which most all cases they are, divided by the 95% expanded measurement uncertainty of the measurement process. There's your formula there. I left on at the bottom of this slide for those folks that are interested. You can always Google it. The ILAC G8 document is free. You can get it right off the ILAC website. To go over some examples here. I don't cover the whole document. So if you like to, that is a resource there that I'm presenting here, and there is the direct link to all the to all the ILAC guidance document. And from that page, you can of course go directly to G8. You might find some other interesting documents there as well. So, of course, 17025, it includes criteria related to decision rules in conformity with requirements and resources and processes related to. We'll see in personnel. We already talked about contract review is addressed right up in the front there. It has to be agreed to up front, and reporting is described below. Again, I have the decision rule definition here, which is the clause 3.7 in the standard. Under personnel, 626, it requires that all laboratories shall authorize personnel to perform analysis of results, including statements of conformity or opinions and interpretation. Hence, this individual who's authorized to analyze these statements of conformance should be versed in the decision rule, and of course their applications. And of course reporting. So we basically saw in the old 2005 standard, when you make a statement of conformity, measurement uncertainty had to be taken into account. So we'll see some, I have them verbatim here from the standard, how that's expanded, particularly in the reporting of results. So when a statement of conformity to a specification or standard for a test calibration is provided, the laboratory shall document the decision rule employed, taking into account the level of risks such as false accept and statistical assumptions associated with the decision rule employed, and apply the decision rule. 7862 requires that laboratories shall report on a statement of conformity such as the statement clearly identifies to which results the statement of conformity applies, which specification standards are part thereof are met or not met, and then last but not least, the decision rule, unless it's inherited in the requested specification or standard. So you can see quite clearly here the concept of taking measurement uncertainty into account. It's been greatly expanded in the 2017 standard. One thing I want to expand on these next two slides, if you look at clause 7862C, the decision rule applies, and we have in parentheses there, unless it's inherited in the requested specification or standards. And those folks that are involved in testing, often this is applicable to various testing types of tests, and the decision rule may actually be incorporated within the procedure. So again, C states the laboratory shall report on the statement of conformities, such as the statement clearly identifies the decision rule. So what does this mean? Unless it's inherited in the requested specification or standard. So I have a few examples here. I'm sure there's quite a few others, but for example, there are testing methods that determine how the rules are applied. One good common illustration is ASTM E18 for Rockwell harness, where the testing and calibration decision rules take uncertainty into account effectively in the repeat testing and other limits, as the spread of the data, etc., and the rules are defined within the methods. Another example is ASTM A29, which is standard specification for general requirements of steel bar carbon and alloy hot weld, where it has an auxiliary table that is based on the method uncertainty to give some extra rooms to make a decision. And this comes right out of that guidance document, G9, states if your application already has measurement decision rules governed by a public standard guidance document. Give some examples here. ISO 14253, 8655, 6508, etc. Generally, in those case standard test methods are prescribed, and often compliance limits already have guard bands built into limits. So any further guard banding to limit risk is not necessary. So like I said, this may encompass some of you testing folks out there, may be already handled within the test method. Calibration, I believe, is pretty straightforward as far as decision rule and reporting and how it's should be agreed to, and then of course documented on the calibration report as stated in the 17025 standard. So for those folks, even on the testing end, even if you perhaps are not so much having to handle each individual test with guard banding, perhaps you have tables where it's already built in. You may also be on the other end where you have equipment that you're taking out to have calibrated. Needs to be a traceable calibration. Hence, you need, even if that's already built into your method, if you're encompassing that, you may encompass decision rules and having to agree to a decision rule with your calibration provider now. So a decision rule for proving conformance or non-conformity with a specification makes it differential whether conformance or non-conformance shall be determined with a high probability. So typically we'll see K equals 2 or a 95% confidence interval associated with uncertainty and often documented on the calibration report. The expanded measurement uncertainty U and a confident level of approximately 95%. Expansion factor K equals 2 will generally be considered as adequate. There may be cases that would require a higher confidence level, 99% for example. And in my prior employment, I have some cases I do recall where the folks who I was providing calibrations for were very versed on measurement uncertainty in the K equals 2. And there were some cases I can recall mostly dealing with those that are used in a court of law, such as that slide with the DNA testing, crime labs, in other words, requiring that K equals 3 or a 99% K factor. So typically with the measurement uncertainty is typically reported at a 95% confidence interval, which is what that example is doing at the bottom, because he's very close. It's taking into account the T distribution, degrees of freedom, and it multiplies that expanded uncertainty times this case the T value of 2, giving you that 95% measurement uncertainty plus or minus 95% confidence interval. So what are we talking about here? I mean, this might be very basic for some folks that are listening, but when we're talking about taking measurement into account, here's a basic case where we have a description, description here, well, we have 4 different cases. So you can see case A, B, C, D. We have that triangular type is the actual value. And those bands on either side, that's that gray area of uncertainty. So typically, say that case 1, and what the upper and lower limits are representing here are the tolerance. So for something to be, say, within specs, it's got to be within the upper and lower limit. So that first case, second case, if you look at the values only, the values are clearly within specs. If you look at case C and D, if you just look at the values only, they are clearly out of specs. So when we look at uncertainty, you can see uncertainty, the bands around the value, more affects the statement of compliance when those values are close to the tolerance limits. So for example, case B, the value is within. However, the uncertainty, that gray area, actually strays to it being out of both the upper and lower limit. And then case C also values in. Clearly, if you're basing your decision just based on that value, you would say that was out of tolerance, fail, does not pass. However, taking measurement uncertainty into account, it can actually, if you're just basing it on a value, you can actually make it a statement of false accept. Where measurement uncertainty would affect that statement of compliance. Case D is clearly out of tolerance, value-wise, and also taking measurement uncertainty into account. So I have some examples here from the ILAC guidance document here, where it talks about a binary decision rule. That is where you make a decision based on a simple pass and fail. So you see here, and this is for simple acceptance. If you recall, simple acceptance is where we are basically, we're not taking measurement uncertainty into account. So in this case, if this is, you're doing a binary statement of simple acceptance rule without guard banding, all 4 of those cases, you clearly state a pass fail. So if we look at the second one over, for example, we will state that as passing because the value is within specifications. However, taking the measurement uncertainty into account may actually affect that decision. Again, with this, if you're doing this, again, this needs to be accepted to and agreed to by your customer up front during contract review. So this is just a simple pass fail basing on the measurement value without regard to guard banding. Again, this is further depicting, even if you are, and this is just taking that previous example a little further, if you are guard banding and you're doing simple acceptance, you can see even with the guard banding, you still specify just those 2 decisions, either a pass or a fail. Now, here are examples of a non-binary statement with guard banding. So in these instances, decision rules exist when multiple terms may express the results. In this case here, we have conditions that could be a clear pass, a conditional pass, a conditional fail, and a straight out fail. So you can read the documentation there, what we're referring to. But basically what this is doing is, for example, under the conditional pass, that's a statement you would refer to on your report in this instance. You're not stating it's pass, you're referring to it as a conditional pass. We're going to look at the ways documenting this here in a little bit as far as a decision rule statement. Looking at the conditional pass, we have a guard band there. So our value it's between the guard band, where we're guard banding against uncertainty, and the actual tolerance limit. So that's the case where it may pass, but it may not pass if you take measurement uncertainty into account. Hence, you can coin that phrase, conditional pass. For those of you all who is accredited with us, we actually address this currently. We have not revised any of our policies at Perry Johnson right now in regards to the revision of the standard. We refer to this, we do give a little guidance on this in PL3. That's measurement uncertainty. We refer to that condition, if you like it better, as pass and determinate or fail and determinate. So in these cases here, you're not going to clearly state pass or fail when measurement uncertainty affects that statement of compliance. Okay, examples of decision rules. So here is an example if customer has agreed to it up front. A simplified acceptance rule, which is basically you're not guard banding. So if the customer agrees that a pass-fail decision are based on acceptance limits chosen based on simple acceptance, where you're basically just looking at the tolerance limit there. The expanded measurement uncertainty calculated is calculated per the GUM, Guide to Uncertainty of Measurement. Must be less than a third of the tolerance based on manufacturer specs. We talked about TUR, if that ratio is 3:1. Statement of conformity or binary. The estimate of the measurement is assumed to have a normal distribution, and specified risk is used for the risk calculation. Now, in this case, if you are and your customer has agreed to this simple acceptance type rule, the risk of false acceptance is up to 50% for measured results. Excuse me, I'm back up a little bit. It could be 50% in the case that accepted items are outside the tolerance limit, or false reject, if it's outside, can be up to 50%. So that's a decision rule that would need to be documented in this case if you're not taking measurement uncertainty into account. So where are we coming up with 50%? That is in the extreme case. It says up to there. So if you're right on the tolerance limit as far as a pass or fail, measurement uncertainty is a value plus or minus a degree of uncertainty. So that's a 50-50 when you look at it and you think about it that way. So the risk of false acceptance in this case, if you're using a simple acceptance rule, could be up to 50%. Hence the decision rule that would need to be documented here is the simplified acceptance decision rule with, you have to take into account the risk of false accept or reject, which we'll see here shortly. That in this case is up to 50%. Here we have the guard banding example, where we have more than two decisions. So this is where we have the conditional pass, conditional fail, and let's say this is an example that you're employing in your lab, and the customer agrees that decision rules are based on guard band acceptance limit. where you're guard banding the tolerance against those against the acceptance limits being guard banded with the uncertainty, where U is the expanded measurement uncertainty calculated per the GUM standard of conformity, or non-binary. The estimate of the measured is assumed to have a normal probability distribution, and risk is used for the risk calculation. In this case, the risk of acceptance items to be outside the tolerance limit is less than 2.5%. For rejected items, the risk to be inside the tolerance limit is less than 2.5%. When the measure result is close to the tolerance limit, the risk of false accept and reject is up to 50%. And I'll expand on that a little bit. So what that is, it's a little bit confusing when you look at that. But if you say something is in the acceptance level, and let's say it's right on that limit, and this is based on a 95% confidence interval, it's plus or minus. So you're going to go plus 2.5% into that conditional pass zone. Hence, that leaves an additional 2.5%, where you could be making a decision of false acceptance when you are basically stating something passes. Again, the 50% would be in those cases where it falls directly on the tolerance or the acceptance limit there. So here we have 4 different criteria. We have accept, conditional pass, conditional fail. We also have a rejection interval. So here we're going to have several different decision rules that should be expressed on your calibration report if you are a calibrator. So we would specify for stating something that passes. The measured value were observed in tolerance at the points tested. The specified false accept is up to 2.5%. We'll identify conditional pass. The measurement values were observed in tolerance at the point tested. However, a portion of the expanded measurement uncertainty intervals, about one of the more measured values, exceeded tolerance. When the measurement result is close to the tolerance, the specified false accept is up to 50%. And then here is just the reversal on the other side that defines the decision rule for a conditional fail, or something might, like I said, barely fail. However, it could fall over into the pass category. That would be a appropriate decision rule statement to define that. And those values that clearly fail. So one of the measured values were observed out of tolerance at the point tested. The specified false reject is up to 2.5%. Okay, so a couple other common decision rule statements. Perhaps you don't like the concept of the conditional pass fail. You want to report a pass or a fail. You just want to guard band, let's say, against the 5%, the 5% of possibility of false acceptance or false rejection. So I have a couple other decision rule statements that are perfectly okay if, of course, your customer agreed to it. Accounting for the uncertainty will take it to mean that at a 95% confidence level, the measurement result plus or minus the expanded uncertainty, K = 2, shall be totally within the specification limit, and the risk of false accept/rejection will not be greater than 5%. Or even more simpler, the results cannot be reported as being in specification if the risk of false accept/reject to the customer is greater than 5%. So we have to take the level of risk into account with these decision rules. And that's the requirement stated right there in 7861. When a statement of conformity to a specification or standard is provided, the laboratory shall document the decision rule employed, taking that into account. Taking into account the level of risk. So the risk word pops up here, such as false accept, false reject, and the statistical assumptions associated with the decision rule employed and applied to the decision rule. Okay, there may be cases you might be thinking might have a completely different application where you may have customers where the uncertainty or decision rule would be very minute or may not really apply to them in their areas of testing or calibration. Like anything, I just want to point out, if for whatever reason, these are requirements, and during the 7.8, one of the very first requirements it talks about is simplified reporting, and that is based on when agreed with the customers, the results may be reported in a simplified way. Any information listed between the clauses 782, 787 that is not reported to the customer shall be readily available. So that was also specified in 2005. 2005 specifies a written agreement. 2017 does not. I would suggest, however, if for whatever reason you're bypassing this, it needs to be agreed to up front, and I would capture that in writing. Create a record that it was agreed to between you and your customer. So some instances that this may apply, very coarse testing, destructive testing, just have their example of a furniture test on the far left side, or say like a truck scale calibration, 1,000-pound blocks, a motorized weight cart used on a scale with 20-pound graduations. Okay, that concludes today's presentation. We will pause here for a second, and like I said, I hopefully looks like I got some questions here. I will try to answer as many as I can. Hi, is it also a decision rule not to take the measurement uncertainty into consideration? Can the laboratory and the customer negotiate this in a way? Again, you know, I try to emphasize here, you need to agree to it up front. You know who your customers are better than I do. You need to be flexible with it. There are parts of the standard where you need to meet your customer's need, but absolutely, the key here is you need to come to an agreement. And I'm just rereading the question. And what you're talking about here is that simple acceptance where you're not taking it into account. So if that is the case, however, just recall that needs to be documented on the calibration report, that decision rule, and it needs to take into account the level of risk, which we depict there when we went over that slide. That could be up to 50%. So if you and your customer has come to that agreement, that's fine. And you also need to look at it, perhaps you're reporting the uncertainty, you're reporting just a pass-fail without taking it into account. Your customer may very well be able to make that decision for themselves, looking at the value, looking at particularly those that are close, and determining whether or not measurement uncertainty would affect that decision, and whether or not that would affect perhaps their own testing or calibration that they do in regards to the artifact that perhaps they're sending to you all. I'm trying to read this next question. Or contract laboratories required to provide statements of conformity when requested by the client? If not, can a laboratory choose not to provide this service and therefore have no need for a decision rule? Well, absolutely. If you're, and I recently came across this on an assessment, laboratory decided that they're going to report the values without making a statement of compliance. Well, the very first thing, yes, if your customer agreed to that up front and you're reporting, hey, this is, let's say, a test weight, for example. This is the value of your 1 gram test weight, 1.00005 grams, and your uncertainty is 0.002 milligrams. And you are not stating a pass or fail there, then there is no decision rule to be documented on the report. That is just when you're making that statement of compliance that the decision rule needs to be there. So if for whatever reason you are not reporting a decision, you are not reporting a statement of compliance on the report, then there is no decision rule there. All right, next, if a customer asks to see only the readings that fall outside the outer tolerance limit, plus the uncertainty guard banded, as a fail on the certificate, that is okay. Again, you have to, I'm not sure I'm capturing the whole gist of the question. That's perfectly fine, except you still have to document the decision rule with the level. And it looks like you're talking about just on the failure side with the level of false acceptance. So if you're actually guard banding those failures, that's a K equals 2 or 95% confidence interval. You still need to document that level of false false rejection in that case. If the customers are internal and don't require HAL Labs is for the purpose of the pass or fail the product. And I'm reading this exactly as it's typed. I don't know if I'm missing part of the question there. So if you have an internal customer, internal to your organization, and basically with those reporting, no, you don't have to report the decision rule. The simplified, you're looking at simplified reporting there. For it states for internal customers and agreed to by external customers. But we're going to backtrack a little bit to records. You have to maintain the records where need be, go back and determine whether or not measurement uncertainty may actually affect a statement of compliance. But for internal customers, you have a lot of wiggle room there. As long as you maintain the records where you can go back and do the reverse traceability and see if it actually affects the results. So that would go with anything in reporting the results for internal customers. They can all be reported in a simplified manner. And this next question, and this is an area I'm not familiar with at all as a testing, it's referring to ELISA, which I know what that is, but as far as the testing protocol, I'm not familiar with. Negative controls are always run with unknown sample. The kits provide a clear value after which results are declared positive, then do you think we need to draw a decision rule for our results? And you asked me what I think. I think that sounds like one of those areas that may be incorporated within the test method. How that is guard-banded against. But again, I really don't know in that particular instance. For making no statement of compliance on the certificate, is no statement regarding the decision rule required. No, if you're not making a statement of compliance, there is no decision rule statement to be made. Just bear in mind, if your customer requires a statement of compliance, which, yeah, you need to determine, and this is specified in section 7.1 under review request tenders and contracts. If it's determined during that they don't need a statement of compliance on the report, say the value and the measurement uncertainty is sufficient, you're not making a statement of compliance. Hence, no decision rule is needed. And like I said, you know your customers better than I do, and that might be fine for perhaps 99.9% of them. All right, very good questions there. Again, this presentation will be available on the, I think I got to the end there. I'm still getting questions. Nope. Before I sign off, just want to, we already have next month's webinar, which is Friday, October 25th. 1 o'clock, and we're going to look at the first two sections in the 2017 standards. It's also expanded on 4.1 impartiality, 4.2 confidentiality. Again, this presentation is available. Will be available shortly on our website, the recorded version. The slides will be there as well. And again, that ILAC guidance document G8, that's new. That was just released. So there's a lot of good information on there. So if you want further reading, and there's other examples stated in there, that could all, I think, is an excellent resource for particularly you calibrators to take a look at. So again, real good questions. I appreciate everybody logging in. I appreciate your interest, and I look forward to doing this again next month. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.